For the next 3 days, I will be discussing and just giving the workshops on, first of all, the data. Tomorrow, I guess I will give about research design, hypothesis, and finally, in the third day, either on Wednesday or Thursday, I will give a presentation on how to publish, how to make successful publishing, and so on. So again, I would prefer to keep it as a not kind of the dry lecture. So whenever you have a questions, whenever you have add-ups to my presentations, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, ask a question, or just if you want to give a quick comments, I'll be really happy to just to go over that. So this skill workshop is prepared based on my class that I teach for the last 10 years. It's called Research Methods for Social Sciences. So I just try to make it more adjustable to this school. So the first question, whenever everybody talks about data collection, data analysis, data, the first question appears, why in the world, and what's the issue with that? Why do we need the data? So what is data needed, and why do we need to collect the data? So as any other social science researcher, you should understand that in order to prove your argument and make your argument standing criticism, your argument should be based on the two things. One is the logic, and a second one, empirical evidences. Well, the logic, I would say, I would leave it for you, whether your statement is illogical or not. I cannot just intervene to that. But empirical evidences is one of the most important issues in the social sciences. Empirical evidence means that you collected the data, and your data is based on the certain type of the mechanism of collection, and meanwhile it's proved by the systematic observations that is called the data. If your statements or if your arguments are not based on the observations or the data, that's usually called speculation. So in order to avoid speculation, you should just be on the side of the having the issue of the to have it empirically proven. So there's two things in the research methods and in the data collection that should be all the time provided or sustained while you are collecting the data. One thing is called data validity, and the second thing called data reliability. So let me explain in more details what it is, and if you have questions, please ask it. I can just go in additional explanation. Validity means that the data you collected from various sources has passed through the rigorous checkup, whether your data that you're trying to collect is properly measured. For example, if you decide to measure the height of the person with the scales, that the data is not valid. If you're trying to measure the person's happiness with how much food he's eating, it's, well, not necessarily, it's also valid. If you're trying to measure the person's income, especially in our country, and measure how much he talks, it's also not valid. Valid method and valid data means that the data, the instrument that you collect the data is exactly matching the data you try to collect. Was I able to explain? If you have any question, please stop me. I can just go in details what the valid data is about. The second, not mechanism, but second, the condition that should be met from this perspective is that data must be reliable. We often hear the word that, oh, the data is not reliable, the information is not reliable, and so on and so forth. So the word reliable from that perspective means that the source of the data, or the data, if it's collected one more time, it will give you the same results. So for example, if I'm trying to collect the data on the income of the people, I collect the data today, I may collect the data tomorrow, I may collect the data in 2-3 days. It's all the time the data is the same. So data does not change. If it doesn't change, it means it's a reliable data. The same way with the source of information. For example, why we always believe BBC or CNN, well, sometimes we don't believe in BBC and CNN, but in most of the cases, if you believe them, we usually call them, it's a reliable source. Why it's reliable? Because information given or data given by this agency can be replicated or could be found somewhere else also. So validity of data is something to do whether you're properly collecting it. Reliability means whether the same data repeats itself or not. If it doesn't repeat itself, then it's not reliable. So two things with the data should be reinforced. It's a validity and reliability. Any questions so far, guys? You may raise your hand and ask a question if you don't understand it. Okay, so if not, let's move toward the types of the data. Well, this type of the data I just put over here, it's not necessarily the exclusive or mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. So by the type of the data can be divided into the several parts. Well, first of all, the data can be qualitative data and quantitative data. Qualitative data is usually the data that we collect from the non-numerical sources, or the data is not non-numerical. For example, it could be interviews, it could be observations, it could be our approaches, it could be newspaper articles. That's called qualitative data. Quantitative data, it's as usual, its name itself, it's saying you, it's a data that is based on the numbers. Let's say how old are you, how many cars do you have, how many calories do you intake, what's your income, what's your happiness level, everything is indexed and there's a certain type of the number. So it's a qualitative data and quantitative data. Within quantitative and qualitative data, there could be two types of other data. One is called primary data, another called secondary data. Primary data, when you collect the data itself, when you yourself generating this data most of the time, or somebody else is generating you, but it's a direct access you have. For example, this is your own observation, this is your own interview, this is a survey that people conducted. This is a kind of a focus group that people did. That's called primary data. Secondary data, it's usually some other agency collected for you. It's usually statistical data. It could be the data given to, for example, World Bank data, IMF data. So the data that was already collected, not by you, but by somebody else, and you're referring to this data. So what is the most important? It's you have to understand it's a qualitative data or quantitative data, or the data is a primary data that you generate, or secondary data that you have access of. So then question comes, how to collect the data? What is the process of data collection? So you have to understand that from this perspective, the data collection can be divided into the several methods of how to collect the data. One of the most useful and was one of the most popular methods of data collection, so usually primary data collections, it's called survey collection, survey data. What's a survey? You usually know. It's actually you create some kind of the questionnaire that consists of the 10, 20, 30, sometimes it's 300 questions, and you began to collect the data based on these questionnaires from the most of the time population. That's a simplistic way to explain what's a survey research. But how to collect the data, the approaches could be different. One of the data collections methods could be telephone surveys. Telephone surveys is just a simplistically or mail surveys. What has really happened is that you distribute the surveys to the people and they answer you and they send you back. Well, for example, when I was living in the United States back in 2000s, I always receiving in my mailbox some kind of the questionnaire, and the person who was just writing this, I mean, the company who was writing this questionnaire would actually ask me, dear resident, please, can you fill in the questionnaire so we can analyze the data that we are using. So they will give a questionnaire. I will fill in the data, put it back in the envelope, and send them back. Once they receive it, they will send me back something right around $5 to $10 as a gift. So, dear Valiyev, Dr. Valiyev, thank you very much for participating, and I will get it and I will go to the Walmart to buy something for, as a poor student, I would usually buy the food. So that's how you earn money once you're a PhD. So if once time you are participating in such survey, it's not a bad idea. That's self-administered survey. And those people taking the surveys, analyzing the, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and that's it, what really happened with this data. The second type of the data, it's kind of collections of the surveys, is a telephone surveys. So telephone surveys, it's usually very often used by the today's biggest companies such as Gallup, Pew Research Center, and so on. And they usually, what they do, they usually call for 2,000-3,000 respondents, asking them about a certain type of the questions, whether it's a Biden administration, Trump administration. So to look at the barometer of the opinions, that will be called telephone survey, one of the cheapest way. But in our societies, the telephone survey, it's very difficult to conduct because people don't usually trust the telephone survey. And this is a kind of problem. The same way with a self-administered survey, the response rate would be very low if you decide to send it. The most popular type of the survey research in Azerbaijan or in Belarus, or actually Belarus, sorry about that, or in Central Asian countries, would be face-to-face interview. What do you mean face-to-face interview? It's when the interviewer going to the home with a questionnaire and asking the question one by one. It has a higher validity, reliability, but it's very costly because you have to pay the person to the go house by house. The cost of conducting this kind of the research is extremely high. Questions so far? Okay, if there's no question, let's continue. Another type of the data collection methods, what would be called as interviews. Whenever you do kind of writing dissertation, master thesis, or some kind of the paper, one of the most popular, your research, qualitative research or qualitative data is considered interviews. Well, some people think interview is one of the easiest way to collect the data. You just simply go and talk to some person and collect the data. No, that's not true. Interview most of the time divides on the two sides. It's a structured interview and unstructured interview. Structured interview, when you already have set of the questions and you go one by one to the questions to see whether the how they answer the certain type of the question. Unstructured interviews, you just are simply going and you see how the process of interview happening and you're directing your discussions toward that area. So interviews divided by two sides as a structured and non-structured, unstructured, and it depends on the whom you interview. You can interview three categories of the, I would say, people, or three categories. One is the interview with the experts in this field. So for example, if you're writing on international relations or political science, definitely the person who is answering your questions should be a political scientist, PhD in political science, who is able to answer you. The second one, maybe interview could be with a competent people. It's not necessarily could be a politicians or a political scientist per se, but person who is competent to answer and who is able to answer you. So you can ask him the questions related to specifically that issue. And finally, it's an interview with the general public if you want to know opinion of the certain group of the people about this kind of the issue. So with general public, it's very difficult because you should ask a question that is simplistic, that they're able to answer. With competent is and with experts, the problem is that you have to be a little bit more structured and more specific in order to ask them the specific questions. Next method of data collection, I would say we can be called is a focus group. Focus group is another type of the interview when you bring together people who are knowledgeable in this topic, or maybe not knowledgeable in this topic, you just simply want to know the opinion, and you generate discussions on certain type of the topics. So for example, if you're interested in what people think about homophobia in your society, you may come up with the experts in this area, or simply not expert, the people from different generations, and began to ask about the homophobic natures, what leading to homophobic people, what is the sentiments in society, and so on and so forth. Today, there is one of the greatest technique for focused interviews is not necessarily face-to-face. So you already have several kind of the media when you can, social media, when you can easily generate certain type of the discussions. For example, when I was doing some kind of the research I was doing research on urban development and urban planning, what people think about redevelopment of the city. What I did simply, I went to one of the most popular online forums in Azerbaijan called dispute.az, and I generated over there a thread asking the people, okay, what do you think about the situation with the kind of the renovation in Baku city? And I got around 500, 600 responses from maybe 300, 400 people. So this 300, 400 people's opinion already represents for me the data. Then I went to another kind of the forum where I generated the same, or I can go to the Facebook, or I can go to the Twitter. Sometimes it's impossible, but Facebook, and other social media, when you can yourself generate the focus groups by throwing a certain type of the thread. Thread means kind of the line or some kind of the opinion or statement. So asking the people, tell us, what do you think? That's a focus group. Another thing would be called experiments. Experiments is very popular also today, is when you experiment with mostly with a certain type of the people, elements. For example, you have a lot of kind of on YouTube today, certain type of the social experiments, asking the people whether they will donate so much money to victims of the violence. You can just do, certain type of experiments, asking the people how would they treat people of different nationality and so on and so forth. So experiments, it's some kind of the created a setup condition when you simply asking the people to, and you will create this setup condition to see how the people will behave in such environment. Would they change their behavior? Will they be kind of the accepting that behavior or what it is? So this is a kind of another type of the data that usually people using. Questions so far? Next, I would bring the methods of the content analysis. Content analysis, it's a data collection of the certain type of the information or data from the written already document. That's a secondary data analysis, secondary data collection. What is it? For example, if today I'm interested in what is the relationship between, what is the kind of the attitude of elites of Azerbaijan or Azerbaijani governments towards certain type of the kind of situation, I would immediately go to look at the written documentation. So it's a statements of the president, it's a statement, Twitters of the president, statements of prime minister, and so on. I will collect all of it and will begin to analyze. It's a secondary data again. Books, if I'm interested to understand, for example, what book is a more nationalistic or less nationalistic, I will just compare two books looking inside them. This is also called content analysis. Articles, reading articles and conducting analysis of that. Speeches of the people, statements of the people, mass media. A lot of time we are just getting the monitoring. There's such a word as monitoring of the press. Okay, fantastic. So it's what you do. You just monitor the certain period of the press, of certain press in the country to find out how the mood of mass media fluctuate to this or that problem. So, for example, there was a such kind of a study conducted in Azerbaijan and in Armenia, I think a couple of years ago, monitoring the hate speech in both societies. So what they simply did, they just took 10 or 20 newspapers and they began to analyze them from, let's say, January till March for 3 months. They look at Armenian press, Azerbaijani press, put some kind of search words, some kind of hate words, and to see how much this hate word appeared in Azerbaijani kind of mass media and in Armenian mass media to compare what is the level of the hate speech into societies. It's not only about this one. You can just take two books and simply compare two books for the hate speech or for the racism or for some kind of the in-depth analysis of what is really happening with that type of the book. The friend of mine, for example, made a very great analysis of the President Putin's speech, not speeches, tweets, speeches, and statements. So he took for 2-3 years his statements and gave a search word on issues, for example, of Ukraine or something, and look at how the rhetoric concerning the Ukraine, Belarus, Azerbaijan, and other countries was changing depending on certain type of the period. So that's one of the examples of the content analysis. Questions so far, guys? You may raise your hand if you want. Finally, if it's also primary data, it's called observation. Observation, it's usually could be called like a field research work, ethnography, case study. When you simply go ahead and go to the field and begin observation of certain group of the people, behavior, certain kind of the organization, certain group of the same kind of the ethnic groups or people, and to see that how you first of all ask a question, what is going on, and then began to analyze what's the pattern of behavior is happening. When I was in US, one of my research, kind of the observational research, was to look at different churches, how the Sunday or Saturday Bible studies happening in the different kind of the churches. So I just picked up Baptist church, then I picked up a Lutheran church, and then Catholic church, and then you compare how they teach Bible, and it's a purely was ethnographic kind of the research. You see what they're approaching, they're using, how they differ or something like that. Again, it's a qualitative type of the research, and then compare which church's message is stronger and which church's message is a little bit weak. So The question over here, you will ask me whenever we collect this data, what is the best data and what is the best method and what is not best method. So from that perspective, what you need to understand is technically the question would be whether your data collection methods valid and reliable. So, for example, if you decide to do some kind of the interview, your questions can be valid. I mean, they're really intent to learn what the real situation is about. It's fine. But the data may be not reliable. Why it's not reliable? Because interviewer would simply can say that, okay, I never said that. The opinion can change. You will not be able second time, if you go to the same person and ask the question second time in 1 week, he may change his opinion because of some situation changed, because the political situation changed, because his opinion changed. So that's why this data usually interviews, the data for interview may be, if you do it through the interview, it may be valid, highly valid, but it has a very high level of unreliability. Because as I said, the interviewer can change any moment his opinion. So think about that, where's the data of validity and reliability. If you decide to do surveys, the same way, the data can be, how to say, valid, easily valid, but it could be not reliable because the data can change. The data, the people can change their opinion, and that would be kind of the problematic for you in future. Interviews, as I said, the same way. Focus group, absolutely the same as an interview. It can have a data validity, but it has a problem with reliability. Experiments, reliability can be high enough, but validity can have a problem. And then content analysis. With content analysis, it's reliable data. Why reliable? Because written documentation never change. Books, articles, speeches, statements, articles in the mass media, it doesn't change. It remains the same for a certain period of the time. So for example, if you decide to compare, let's say, 2 books, Adolf Hitler's book and another type of the highly anti-Semitic racist book, the book, what is written over there, it will not change. Today the same book, tomorrow the same book. So this data is reliable, but how you analyze it, you may use different questionnaires or you may use different questions to analyze it. It could be not valid then, because your methods of data collection or what to search can be invalid. The same way with articles, the same way with written documentations or statements. Observation, the same way. It could be both invalid and unreliable. It's very difficult to make it possible. So that's why I'm trying to say that what's the best method for doing research. It's a lot of time depends on your ability to collect the data. So it's up to you to understand what data I need, how I need to use it, for what purposes I will use it, and how I'm going to collect it. Depends on your feasibility, whether you are able to collect it, and depends on your research. So nobody can tell you, whenever you write dissertation, whenever you write a master thesis, nobody can tell you, sorry for that statement, that your data, this is wrong data, or this is not appropriate data. No, they may tell you that your data is not valid or not reliable. That's the 2 categories they can use against you. But other than that, then nobody can tell you, oh, why do you choose this data or that data? They can only say, you cannot use this data for your research because it's neither valid nor reliable, blah, blah, blah. Only two words, valid and reliability. Elena, maybe a little bit later, will correct me with her kind of the approaches, that is Brexit-prone approaches. They have a different research strategies after Brexit. We have a little bit different one. Again, I would say that each method has its own advantages and disadvantages. There's no best method for data collection. It depends on your own methodology. And remember that whenever the faculty or whenever peer reviewer or the journals, whenever they review your article, they never judge the results of your publication. They never judge the question that you put. What they really judge is the methodology you're using, whether you're using proper methodology, whether you're using proper data collection mechanism, whether your data is reliable, means it can be replicated, it can be collected again or not, and whether your data is a valid, means you use right instrument to measure what you want to measure. So from this perspective, I would say that what I would sum up with this research is that whenever you look at the data, you have to look at the several parameters. Again, validity, reliability, the methods, quantitative data, qualitative data, whether it's a primary data, whether it's a non-primary data or secondary data. That's pretty much it from my side. Any questions, colleagues? Any question, friends? I will be really happy because I just tried to summarize everything in a one short presentation. So I would be really happy to answer your questions on your own research. If you want to bring your own research questions, I'll be really glad to just answer them. Please raise your hand and I'll be really glad to ask you.
Anar, thank you. There is another question in the chat box.
Oh, can I see where's the chat box? I didn't see chat box.
Alicia Pochniak. Maybe she can ask herself.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Hello. Welcome, everyone. It was lovely to hear your presentation. And if it would be possible to receive those slides, it would be great. I found it very, very useful. And for this reason, because you touched on very, very important points, sometimes if I can't get reliable data from an interviews, from, let's say, high profile politicians, can I instead use, for example, archive search when their opinions, their decisions were actually recorded, written, and put it into files, and they are there, not which didn't change for years, and would you consider this as a valid and reliable data collection in this case?
Yeah, well, that would be the part of the so-called content analysis, when you would collect certain type of the data from document that was already written. Again, that could be the law, that could be the document, that could be speeches of the some politicians. For example, if you are if you are trying to make a research on the, for example, changes in the attitude of the British elites toward the Brexit. So you, for example, collect 5 or 10 politicians, you choose 5 or 10 politicians, look at these speeches that it was already recorded by BBC, by CNN, by some other daily news, whatever it is. And you look at them, and this is called archive, yes, right? As a data collection mechanism for collections of the data. Yes, absolutely, you can use it.
Thank you, Ala. That's very helpful.
Yeah. Any other questions?
If no questions, meanwhile, maybe
Elena can.
Yes, Elena can, and then participants might have more questions to ask. Elena, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll try to share just one file, one screen for your information. Okay. Might take a while. Can you see anything? No?
Not yet.
Well, while maybe waiting for the shared screen to appear, just wanted to say that Anar obviously has covered everything comprehensively in terms of the different methods that could be used for either quantitative or qualitative research. And if we talk about social sciences, that clearly, there is absolute world of different methods that could be applied, and it all depends on the purpose of data that you collect. And in one of the skill sessions, you will learn about, for example, interpretative method. So methods are constantly evolving in terms of how you can actually use data. But I think what is important is to be aware of, and that is particularly important and emphasized now in UK and EU higher institutions, is that first of all, it's about ethics of collecting data, meaning that you need to seek consent of the respondents if you're collecting data. You need to ask them whether they would like to be their responses need to be used anonymously, or they would like to have attribution to their name. You also have to explain the purpose of your data collection and even possibly share the results of your data collection in the end. So that's very important, and it has become even part of bureaucracy in, let's say, UK institutions, that before you go into the field as PhD or postdoctoral research, you need always to seek approval of the ethics committee of the university in order to continue with your research. The second important issue to mention is about data storage. After all, if we're handling information, human data information, then of course there is the whole regulatory process involved here. GDPR, we have all these regulations just to ensure that the data is stored carefully and also with the consent of the participants. So for that, yet again, there are a lot of regulations in place. What I wanted to share with you today, and I don't know why it is not working at the moment. Maybe Nargis, if I were to send you the...
Yes, please.
Because it's not uploading. It's basically, I was going to show you different sources of data, because what is useful, and I sent it to Nargis, maybe she can share it with you, is just a second, I'll just quickly send it. And pardon, Nargis. So 2 seconds, and then I'll move on to talk to you about that. Here we go. Okay, so that's Nargis. Okay, Okay. So basically what I was going to show you, and hopefully you will see it, but at least Nargis will be able to share it with you,
Yes.
is that there are what is useful, and that yet again it came through a recent regulation within the UK, but also in Europe, that all research that is sponsored by research councils, be it either in the UK or in Europe, all this data would have to be deposited and made publicly available, because after all, research is often supported through public money. So to make it publicly available for researchers to use for all this data that has been accumulated through first-hand research, through and the unique data sets, they have to be made publicly available. So concerning UK, I put down, we have the so-called data archive. So depending on, of course, on your interest, on the theme and so on, you can just access that particular archive and look for relevant data. It could be data, could be all sorts. It could be either surveys or interviews or focus groups and content analysis and so on. So all this data would be available there. But you can also, there is a separate archive concerning national surveys and so on. So you can also do it that way. Very similarly, in the EU, you can use data repository there called CORDIS. That's where major all research projects that have been supported through EU funding, they're all listed there. And that's where you can also get all relevant information about the or on the theme that you are interested in. In particular, it's called results packs, and that could be very useful depending. Sort of, it's either a written article using the data or the data itself, and all sorts of other relevant materials that could be interesting and useful for in support of your research. And finally, just to mention it, of course, there are many other sources that you can use and that are available worldwide, depending on what you're interested in. And these are, of course, secondary data. So they for example, secondary data of surveys that have been conducted worldwide, or data collected by various institutions. You can look, for example, at World Values Survey or European Social Surveys, or the data collected by World Bank and other institutions. I kind of put examples there about, for example, Transparency International, or you can use Freedom House. So depending on your research focus, it is all available through search on the internet. And as a researcher, you can also request some data access, depending on, especially given that we have this GDPR, especially in Europe now, GDPR regulations, and you can always request data going directly, for example, even to Council of Ministers, if you're interested in a particular research, and that data could be disclosed to you as well. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you.